Welcome to Spinnovation. Today, our guest is Noelia Almanza Ahari. Welcome, Noelia.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
It's so great to have you here because we have you and I. We have been trying for months actually to get this to happen, and due to various random circumstances, it was very hard to actually come up with a date that worked for the both of us. I'm so happy that we finally could do this. You are you have a long career as a head of innovation at various companies, and a couple of months ago I came across a post on LinkedIn that you had done, and where you touched upon what I feel is a super relevant and important topic, and kind of like almost like a maybe we can call it a syndrome within the innovation area, and it's probably totally agnostic when it comes to what type of business it is about, but it's the topic around innovation theater, and also kind of what can happen when the company is very immature when it comes to innovation. And so when they hire an innovation manager or a head of innovation, then there is a clash in expectations that does not always end well, especially not for the innovation manager, and of course not for the company as well in the long run, because all their innovation efforts are just basically just being poured down the drain. But let's just dive into it. I mean, what did you write, and why did you write it?
First of all, I was contacted by this journalist, Maya Palmer, who works for the magazine Sifted, which is a magazine backed from the Financial Times. And she saw me commenting on another person's post on LinkedIn when it was about innovation theater kills companies. But I also felt that I needed to put some light into, or shed some light upon, the fact that innovation managers are actually the ones always getting in the line of fire when it comes to whose fault it is when innovation does not happen, or if you don't have any output from the innovation factor within the company. So what actually what I wanted to shed some light upon is the fact that even though if you an innovation manager in a company, you know, do your homework, do your research, create this sense of urgency that's needed, it's not always going to be the fact that you're able to do what you're set out for, kind of like, doing, because you have this kind of, as you mentioned, the high level of immaturity within a company, which becomes then a threat to yourself, to your personal brand, because you put yourself kind of out there uh, with your own personal brand, but also for the company at the end, if you have the maturity levels that are permitting you to have sort of a budget, but you can't do anything with the budget because none of the initiatives that you want to drive is actually in line with what the company wants to do. So that's the major thing, I think.
Hmm. And sort of like the way I've been telling others about what your experience have been, and what I think is many with you is that when it comes to the immaturity part here is that they put in many companies put in a lot of effort into hiring what I assume also is very common, sort of like the first head of innovation or innovation manager. But with that, they do that with the expectation that, okay, now we have that checkbox checked. now we have an innovation manager. Let's just sit back and see the innovations come, and sort of
Yeah.
like expecting you or that innovation manager to come up with all the new great ideas, and that's not really how it works. It's about facilitating innovation within an organization, and trying to mobilize the competence and the resources within the company, and also sometimes outside the company as well, to build processes for innovation. But I almost thought it was almost like surreal, some of the situations that you had found yourself in. Could you exemplify, for instance, from not naming the companies necessarily, but just what happened to you, or the discussions with the
Yeah.
companies?
Well, what can I say except that you're kind of totally right when you're talking about this as a fact, because when I was hired as the innovation manager at one of the companies where I've been, I actually spent from August to September, from August to December, to sort of align expectations and clarifying what is going to be needed from the company, from the C-suite, from the people within the organization, and what my kind of expectations also were from the people working within the organization, and also to kind of set the expectations from the owner's perspective as well. Kind of, do we have a vision, or do we have sort of a strategy or a strategic direction for where we want to be? That's kind of the first step. What happened in my case was that they asked me to look into it, to sort of set a more or less a strategic direction to where we could be in a couple of months, in a couple of years. Having that said, the other not very expressed expectations on me were that I more or less would be the person with, as I also mentioned in the article, sort of having a hotline direct to Silicon Valley, and that I should be the very, very, very creative person, coming up with all the good ideas, and having a sort of an innovation portfolio myself, bringing into the company, just starting to executing on all the good ideas and all the ideas that could create a higher revenue, or anything in that matter, or creating a larger inflow of customers or subscriptions or whatever it could be about. So
Basically, almost all the roles in the company is sort of like the sales, the business development, also being a founder and inventor, basically.
exactly,
Mm.
and amplifying everything within the company when it came to how the processes were run in operations, up until C-suite, strategic direction or mindset, call it what you want to call it. But the idea was that we have this head of innovation now, and the head of innovation is going to be some sort of god or a goddess for the company, and all over revenue for the company. But when I then asked, like, what do we want to do with the innovation efforts that we're trying to do here, there was no actual answers to that, and there was no vision either to it. And what I missed the most was actually when I asked them, what is innovation for this company? What do we want to achieve by being innovative? Because there's a lot of companies out there that works with innovation in different ways. And it's also a fact that we have a lot of different companies who are always claiming that they are being an innovative company. But I'm also wondering, what is innovation for these companies? I mean, I have had places where I have had a big insight into the operations or in the strategic plannings. And when I ask the question, what is innovation for you and for us? It can be, even though if you're doing product development, that is innovation for this company. And I would say that as long as you have the right mindset, that's nothing wrong with that. But also to being able to educate the organizations on, product development is one thing. That's kind of linear. But then if you go a step further and looking into how can we use new technology in a new way or old technology in a new way that's creating value for us as a company, that is more innovation than straight up product development. And that's something that I connected back to when I worked as the head of innovation and asking for the direction, sort of what kind of value do we want to create in this company, and what kind of value do we want to give to the users, the customers, or the subscriptors. And this was a question that was really hard to get answered, or even to get an idea out, sort of, making the picture where they wanted to be in a couple of years from now.
Hmm. And this is, I mean, these issues, even though they might seem as kind of like obvious questions, I imagine still though that there's a lot of companies that doesn't really have that nailed down yet, or well defined, but still they should appreciate the fact that this is the way to approach things, and be super happy about doing that hard work, because it will be foundational for and transformational probably for their future development. Do you agree?
I agree. And the biggest risk that you as an innovation manager in a company are running is the fact that if you don't have a framework or something agreed upon when you're, entering the organization as an innovation manager, one side of the coin would be that everything you do is a good thing and that you're kind of taking a step forward in each thing that you're doing. But the other side of the coin is also that everything that you're doing can also be the wrong thing, seen from the perspective of the C-suite, which means that if the C-suite, as in my case, they gave, all kinds of buy-in for me and what I wanted to do. But when I started doing these kinds of things, all of the things were wrong. When I tried to set an innovation strategy and a strategy for the innovation portfolio, it was like, oh no, 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 it feels like you want to build your own sort of organization within the organization, but we have the expectations on you to be the creative person coming up with all the good ideas. So if I would have been coming up with all the good ideas within this kind of company, that most likely would have been also the wrong thing, because then I wouldn't have been creating the skeleton or the
Mm,
structure to the overall organization
mm,
around the innovation efforts that we were trying to execute on. So
mm,
that is the biggest risk, I would say, that all of the innovation manager out there are running every day. And I was talking actually to this guy in Norway who had a similar problem where he couldn't get the right sort of buy-in when he was actually doing some things, but there were in beforehand he had all the buy-ins, so he had a very hard time in sort of doing always the right thing, because everything he made or he did was the wrong thing, but in beforehand everything was the right thing to do. So, and this is something I have been talking to one of the innovation managers at Ford X in San Francisco just a couple of weeks ago, and she also told me the same thing. And
mm,
I think that we can, if we break this down, I can see that it always boils down to the risk of putting money to where the mouth is. And this is where we need to start looking into the organizational setup as well. And I am a big fan of the organizational ambidexterity that we can see in different companies who actually detach all the exploration initiatives or efforts into some kind of a business unit, or having it's very detached from the overall daily operations of the
mm,
company, to be able to just put in 10 million euros into that. What's coming out, they are sure that what's coming out and being introduced to the market is going to be something that's going to create value. And behind that, you can see that there is an 80%, 85% failure of the initiatives that they are doing.
mm,
And then we have in between the exploitation or exploiting units, we have an interface where you can sort of scale up and modify to actually get it functioning within the exploiting units of the company as well.
mm,
So as an innovation manager, you should always try not to become one or the other of these, but you should be an overarching kind of professional guy or girl who is facilitating all of this to happen. And what's happened beneath you in the organization, you need to have this sort of the right buy-in from the overall company and the owners as well.
Hmm.
Yeah,
But uh, that ambidextrous approach, and which is more or less common, um, taken for granted now, that if you want to be successful at innovation, you actually need to be an ambidextrous organization. And just to repeat what you were saying, for the viewers, sort of like you have your core business, and then you have your um, exploration for future innovation, which is not focused on the now, but just the future. And if you cannot handle both these perspectives, um, then you really can't move forward, really. And but what is it that happens um, when you have that buy-in, or that Norwegian guy you were talking about, where or even the Ford X person here, that you first get buy-in maybe on like a theoretical level or strategic level, but then once the pedal hits the metal, so to speak, then people are not liking it, or they feel threatened, or this was not how they had perceived it would be, or I mean, what's the problem there?
I think that one of the most severe things that can happen to you as an innovation manager is the sudden impact or prestigefulness from your key stakeholders, maybe, which implies that you are becoming more or less a threat to them. Because imagine if you're a business unit manager and it's on your table to get the business unit well functioning and having a big revenue or anything like that, that's sort of showing in concrete numbers that you're doing a good job. And then there's coming in this innovation managers from the side telling you that that's not the right way in doing things. 2 years from now, 5 years from now, we need to take into consideration also that we need to start thinking about how to be competitive on the market, or doing the kind of right things for the market and what the customers might like into the future. And they are very happy about where they are standing today. They're producing good results all the time. So the feeling that you would like to shoot down this person coming and telling you that you're doing the wrong thing, have it in mind that you're so full of prestige and all of these kinds of good and also bad things when it comes to the feelings, can be very complicated for the innovation manager, because that means also that you're running the very, very high risk of being shut down, made unnecessary for the company. And she or he is only trying to do this, and this is going to cost this much money. And if you don't have the buy-in from the absolute top of the company, or even the owners, that this is actually something that we need to do, it's going to be very hard for you as the innovation manager of the organization or the company to actually go all the way with what you want to do. And if you don't have the mandate in doing these kinds of things, you're going to have a big, very, very hard future ahead of you.
Hmm.
And I personally, I have felt that a couple of times throughout my career as well, where I have had people showing their jealousy and doing everything in their power to just shoot me down and make me so not on top of things. And I mean, I was the appointed vice president for the Swedish Society of Disaster Medicine back in 2017. And me coming from sort of a very different background. I have a background in medicine, and I have a background from pre-hospital care and disaster medicine. Even so, me coming in being a woman, I was very young. I was becoming a threat for those who have been fighting for this position over the course of 5 to 10 years. What they did then, they started to go out to their industry specific media, talking about me, trying to say that even my background is wrong, that I haven't read or studied the things that I have studied, or done the things that I've done. And I have been working in Bolivia for 9 years and created a big, large institution kind of thing there, working in the healthcare settings in Cochabamba. And when you talk about these things, it's becoming very easily that you express yourself that, I did this because, in kind of international settings, you're kind of used to talk about what you have accomplished. But taking into consideration also the jantelagen that we have in Sweden, you can't really talk about yourself in that good way, because you need to always, no, I didn't do that. That was nothing, and things like those. But the actual truth around this was that, I was the appointed project manager from the beginning in a small project, and which then exploded into something very, very big. And how can a 16-year-old girl from the northern parts of Sweden, being coming in from Colombia, being able to do something like this? So, and this has been the story so many times. I was working at one of the largest hospitals in the world, or in Sweden even, and I was at a large national summit in business, and I met some really outstanding persons from the political scene, from the investor side, which was really, these people were very famous at the time. This was back in 2008 or something like that. And when I got back to my word where I was working, and told them, just colleagues in between, about what I was doing and who I had met with, etc., etc., they started to talk about me behind my back, and saying that, it's an impossibility. She can't have been doing this. That's, it's pure lies. And I was very hurt from this. And that's something that's very showing, especially in some certain industry where I have been, where this has been more common than in other, industries. And I want to tell, and I want to say to everybody out there that are working as an innovation manager, that try to find your inner security when it comes to these kinds of things, because you should never let anybody sort of trying to, get to you and ruin your career, etc., etc., because that was actually what happened to me. And as you might, if you have read this article that you, Peter, is talking about, you can see somewhere that I was very, very tired about being in the innovation industry, and that's why I changed industries now. But that's just for me to reload and get back on track again. Uh, but getting back to your question there, there's a lot of prestigefulness out there, and people, really trying to get rid of all of these innovation managers, just because they don't feel that they can deliver on what's needed to do innovation happening in a company.
Uh, it's pretty amazing to hear you say that at that organization you mentioned that they actually they did smear campaigns against you and your person, and that's I hope it's not super usual. But and it sounds very extreme, but it must also have been very, very awful. And I think that would really affect anyone, regardless of how strong they are as a person. It must be super tough. It's so what you actually were saying now, also sort of like as one of the reasons, is sort of like when you present let's say an innovation strategy or an innovation initiative, it puts pressure on maybe a department or a division, and that pressure is pretty unwelcome because it's something new, and of course it's very human to fear new things. and also might change that unit in the organization in unpredictable ways, and maybe threaten the people currently in charge. Would you say that that's the main reason, maybe?
I would say that's one of the main reasons to why we can see this. And the other sort of connected reason I can say, talking from the um, public sector perspective, is that in some cultures in Scandinavia, for example, we can see that we have a blaming culture, which means that if you are not successful, you're going to be blamed for this, and then you are running the risk of losing your job, for example. And me coming from most of the time public sector, being an innovation manager or working with innovation, have seen this so many times. I actually tried to challenge this at a conference held by the National Contingency Agency here in Sweden, MSP, where I challenged it on a debate on a large forum with a lot of different listeners from throughout the public sector. And I was like, if we want to surpass this or bypass it in some sort of manner or ways, wouldn't it be good for the public sector to mitigate this from happening, that we can goal set a percentage consisting of consistent failures. So if we want to do 10 innovative projects, let's say that, why can't we goal set that we're going to fail by 80%, like 8 of 10 projects? So when you are failing, you can just point to the goals and say that this is, the essence of what we're doing. It's just,
it's part of the KPIs.
Exactly. But it was kind of brave doing that with having, politicians and all of these dudes around me. But I was, from one side of the audience, I was kind of, yeah, you're so right. And the other side, but no, you can't do that because, we're working, everybody here, with tax money, and you can't really go and waste somebody else's money or money that comes in from taxes. But then you should ask yourself, what's the reason to why we're doing this? We're trying to create something new here that creates the value that you get from, paying all of this money. Because if we're going to stay in a status quo and not doing anything, we're going to be outaged so fast by all the new technology, especially in the healthcare settings, that you could question if it's a waste of money that way too. And this is, if you are a manager running the risks of being, of your work being made visible, that's not, really executing or successful in a way, and you can point out the person in the organization that I'm running the risk of losing my job because of you. Of course, that's human, that I want to, get rid of this threat, more or less, I would say.
Yeah, but I think, and this is not particular for Sweden in any way, I think, but working with the public sector, yeah, that is funded by tax money, that gives that brings a certain there are different almost like rules for the game there, or at least standards or consensus in the way that in the public sector it's more important to not do the wrong thing than to do the right thing, and that's one popular way of phrasing it. And also handling responsibly with public money, it also comes into play, and that basically means that your hands are tied if you're going to work with innovation in a really efficient manner, because innovation sort of like implicitly involves failure, but it's controlled failure. It's part of the process in order to sort of like find the successes. And I'm sort of thinking that this is also when it comes to funding, like research, this is I saw a study done a couple of years ago where they had looked at public funding for innovation and research, and public funding government agencies, and how successful their the funding was, the projects that were funded. I mean, if you're investing public money, it's almost a given that, yeah, you want to invest responsibly. And what kind of projects will you invest in? Well, the projects that will have the highest, that are deemed to have the highest success rate. And usually those are not the most radical projects. And then that kind of public funding was compared to the Howard Hughes Foundation in the States. And there, you as a researcher, you have a hard time finding money if you're not far out there in your thinking and your proposal. So they take like bets on really improbable projects. And of course, their failure rate is much, much higher. But when something succeeds, the impact is also much, much higher. And it's probably a challenge to sort of like get that thinking into also the public sector, because as you pointed out, this is something that actually benefits the taxpayers, not being too having to be too careful, or at least careful. You can always be careful. You are careful in innovation. You're not reckless, but there's a method to the madness, right? And you have to allow for that methodology.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think that we need to start looking to what possible outcomes you can get from doing these initiatives that you want to do, and especially when it comes to the public sector. I mean, you should also be clear on, the things that you're doing, what kind of impact they might have. And when it comes to the research parts that you're talking about now, I think, we're doing research to learn things. And if we can point out that the most important thing is to, learn how to do things the correct way, or, take small baby steps to reaching the overall larger targets. If you take a small step into that, I think you can say that you're kind of being successful, even though if you're not reaching to the state of innovation or incremental innovation. But that should also be something that's okay. We should be okay with this, because that means that we have opened a new door. We have opened a new way into the future that we can start to investigate more on. So I wouldn't say that, just because we have been using uh, computer tomography to figure out some diseases, we should always, keep on doing these kinds of things. But because there's maybe going to be some other way that we can do this in the future, but the cost in money is going to be so huge and so vast that we can't even, imagine it in getting there. But if we can, just launch 2 or 3 different research projects that can bring us closer to an understanding of what's needed and, what parts are missing here and there, I think we should start seeing that as a success. Not, it's not about always getting to the goal at just in one try.
Mhm.
And that kind of mindset is becoming increasingly more important. And especially if you want to show, if you're in a company, a privately held company, that you're trying to do the right thing and that you're taking the steps necessary to get there, to the owners, I think that you will have the buy-in on, it's okay that you're doing this, but
Mm.
don't let that, eat the entire budget, for example. But you should start looking into that as a way of getting there.
Mm. Um, what um, what more did you get any interesting responses after doing this very um, honest post on LinkedIn about um, the immaturity and the unreasonable expectations that you had experienced.
Sorry if I
Uh,
got.
the um, what kind of reactions did you get from either colleagues or maybe also from, as you mentioned here, from other from newspapers or media outlets? What were the reactions?
The main reaction I would say that I got from all of the people reaching out to me or writing emails was that they were living the same reality and they didn't really know how to enhance or uh, level up the levels of maturity within their organizations. And I don't think that there's only one answer to the question here either. But one thing that was really standing out in all of these organizations and the persons telling me about it was that maybe the expectation management could have been, done in a better way, or that you could start your innovation journey by actually trying to point down what innovation really is for the company and looking into where you want to be in a year from now or 2 years from now. Because if you don't do this kind of expectation management, it's very, very easily happen that you end up feeling that the immaturity is taking over, and because nobody knows exactly why we're doing this or how we're going to do it, even though
Mm,
if you as an innovation manager know how to do it, you might not know why you're doing it. So that was the main thing sticking out from all of the persons talking around this. And the industries they range from the automotive industry till the most tech oriented industry as well. So it is actually a common thing.
mm. And I I assume that, yeah, it's comes down to setting expectations, and I guess assumptions here that are the mother of all f-ups is sort of like they come from both sides. And maybe the innovation managers sort of like assume that the people in charge, they understand this or should understand this, and vice versa, the people in charge sort of like assume that this is what the innovation manager should do, and then it's totally different pictures.
There's a very huge discrepancy between those two,
Mm,
where you find yourself as the innovation responsible guy and maybe your C-level executives. And that's exactly what I feel that I did wrong on in my last voyage. I would say that even though I spent so many months in aligning and getting a picture of what they wanted, me ending up as their head of innovation created a sense of, at least for me, that they knew what they wanted to achieve and they were ready to put the money where the mouth was.
mm,
But that turned out not to be the actual truth, even though I had spent so many months in doing this work. So it's very hard to actually say that you should spend at least 6 months trying to align expectations and getting the overall pictures. I think it's better to look into maybe the strategic plan or the vision that the company wants to do, and telling them that if we're going to do this, we can use innovation as a tool to begin with, and then starting to disseminating innovation throughout the entire organization, building with processes and creating the sort of the structure. And
mm.
also one other thing that I actually felt the hardest thing was the thing that we have touched on earlier on, that the view and a head of innovation in this particular company was that the head of innovation is a very creative person. I would beg to differ, because the head of innovation oftentimes is a very structured person, but
Mm.
also a very forward thinking person who wants to get somewhere by doing you know things that can create the value for the organization, always having the best for the organization in mind.
Yeah, and also I think it's such an unreasonable expectation, um, and immature expectation to have that yeah, okay, we need a really creative person here, or we expect the innovation manager to be really creative. I mean, I my personal perspective is that yes, every person more or less has a creative potential. They just need to to acknowledge it. But innovation is sort of like about facilitating the creativity of the whole company, really, and not just the creativity. It's also about ideas in general and experience and all that, and leverage that into new areas. And that's why it's kind of like surprising. Maybe I'm just naive, but to hear that people actually have those expectations.
Yeah,
So,
but I think that, most of the business sites or most of the companies where I have been have actually been companies where you have turned from a startup into a very huge scale up
mm,
business. And it's very easily happened that you then are stuck in, if you want to work with innovation, using it as a tool, you might think that, if you were, innovative before, you can have this kind of creative person in the organization and getting something out of it. But when you are a company of 100 person or up to 1,000 persons, it's becoming another thing. It's
mm,
the body of innovation is so much larger, and you need to, as you are mentioning here, to have idea management. You need to have a filter to know how to measure the impact of each and every idea that is blooming from within the company, because now you're not only having one creative person in the company. You might have, if you're 1,000 persons, you might have 400 people that are very creative and
mm,
seeing ways forward for the company. And then you need to have a collective way on seeing how we should manage all of the ideas, and taking them from there, and scaling them in or scaling them out or scaling them away from the company. Um,
yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah.
and we should actually be more fond of entrepreneurship in Sweden as a country as well, because I think we can see a lot of different benefits from taking care. If the idea is not suitable for the company itself, you should encourage this creative person to go on forming his or her own company, um, having a spin-off effect on the company. And then maybe if you want to, as a company, you can invest in this company,
Mm,
and then you have all of a sudden a corporation maybe.
mm. Yeah, I totally agree. There's uh, a guest a couple of years ago where she had done research on entrepreneurs as such, and even published a book with the title, I think, Entrepreneurs, the Hidden Innovation Resource within companies. And uh, she suggested that there are some companies, but quite few, that actually have a strategy for dealing or taking care of the entrepreneurs within the organization. But my guess is that the majority of companies does not have such a strategy, and a lot of people leave once they find themselves in the situation that people are not really listening to good ideas or are afraid to implement them. So yeah, I'm sure, totally agree. Um, in uh, Again, I think your post on LinkedIn about these incidents and experience that you've had, I think it stood out, at least to me, and I guess to many others as well, in that it was so honest. You weren't pinpointing any specific companies, of course, but still, it's very, very rare to see people, and especially I think professionals, to sort of like bring up some of the bad aspects or darker aspects of a certain profession. And I'd say within the innovation management profession. It's not unheard of, but it's not very common. It's also sort of like if you are very upfront about these things, some of you, maybe your future employers might be sort of like afraid of hiring you because they think you might say something very honest about their organization as well. But the upside is also sort of like now people um, are discussing this, or at least you and I are doing it in a pod like this. And you told me also you're having you have probably had media interviews before, and you're having more pod appearances as well. And so apparently there is an interest around this. And I also know a lot about or other innovation managers that had other bad experiences, maybe not exactly like this, but in other contexts, and it's also something that is not spoken about publicly, because for most people this is their profession, their career, and of course they don't want to be ostracized by future employees just because being honest. I think it was very courageous of you. And also, if I understand things correctly, you your background was in management, and now sort of like you have taken a break from the innovation management part, and now going back to management without necessarily focusing on innovation. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct.
So you sort of like created your own sort of like safety net for you there. You had something to retreat to in that sense.
Yeah.
We before we round up here, I thought also we that we should discuss a thing you proposed, and that is sort of like innovation within heavily regulated industries. And I assume it's your experience from the care sector, healthcare sector, that I know is sort of like super heavily regulated. Also, I guess the perfect storm is when it is within the healthcare sector and the public sector, which is also heavily regulated in its own way. So what are your opinions or thoughts on that?
Yeah, first of all, I want to go back to what you said about the innovation manager and kind of, I'm being one of the only persons that are talking about this. I think I felt that, I am, I've been through this so many times, as I were telling you in beforehand, with people who wanted to, make me out from the market sort of. And I feel that even though if I have been struggling with the sensation of a personal failure every time, that innovation has never been the product of what I have been doing, and when I have had to leave a company or something like that. So I wanted to show that, you're not alone out there. And the other thing is that if we want to improve our position in the market, or our profession, we should also talk about the dark sides, because if we're not talking about the dark sides, we can never ever really identify what's missing for us to become even better as innovation professionals. So this was kind of something that I wanted to do, because I wanted to highlight this to all of the people in the world that is working with an innovation. And I think that that's one of the reasons too, so many people have reached out to me and told their histories and shared with me their feelings. And it has been very valuable for me to hear all of the persons, all of these people's experiences. And that has made me even stronger. Um, and I know the sensation of feeling, very blunt as an innovation manager, or if you're even uh, you're very how can I put it, doubtful of yourself and your capabilities. But that should never be the case. So to everybody who is listening to this episode, feel free to reach out and just know that this is a common thing out there. And as to your question here, innovation in a heavy regulated industry, that is something that's very common, especially in the public sector, life science, healthcare, health tech. And you need to take into consideration all of these regulations that, are now and also are coming into the future, what we can expect, etc., etc. So if you come up with a good idea, what you need to build into the process of innovation is also aligning this to all of the regulations that are out there. For example, in Sweden, we need to take into consideration to have this MDR, medical device regulatories, in mind when you're doing this, so that it's not coming sort of like a surprise to you when you're trying to get it onto the market or trying to get it out there tested or something like that. And that's something that I think that you are kind of familiar to with your background within research and such. And also to take height for all of your projects when you're working, that not all organizations have the actual competence in-house to decide if this is going to be something for them or not. I have been working, for example, with an AI solution for triage for patients, which is, from my point of view, also something that has been kind of a holy grail within healthcare and health tech, coming from the intensive care. And that's something that I've seen, PhD students working on ever since like 2007, to be able to measure blood glucose levels, not having to pinch the patient, for example. And this is something that is coming true now, but I can't actually mention the company and I can't, mention anything around it, but we have this as a solution, or we're going to have this as a solution during next year. And when you want to take something like that on board, let's take, just for an example, this is when we talk about remote patient monitoring, or if you're a health tech company looking into the vertical of diabetic patients, for example. And if you're going to do this by remote patient monitoring, and you don't want to be invasive, meaning pinching a hole in the patient's skin, drawing some blood or other tissues, then there is this thing where you can measure the blood glucose level by the camera of your cell phone, for example. And if you now take this in the context of that, you have had like so many institutes and universities trying to find the ways in doing this, and then you're all of a sudden you come from, as in my case, I came from the ambulance industry into a health tech company, and talking about this, it's magic, and magic very few times is taken very seriously from very serious persons, to be honest with you. So you need to take into consideration also to see what kind of approvals does this feature have throughout the world. If you don't have the CE and MDR, do you maybe have an FDA approval, or some sort of approval from any kind of medical testing or approval agency? That's a very good indicator on that this is something that's very legit, because I had myself a very hard time in believing that this was really actually something that was doable. But then, me coming in and reading all of the specifications and how you can use different technologies in to get the right answers to this, it is amazing. And if
It
we
sounds
can,
amazing.
yeah, it is amazing. And that's the hard part, because if you are having a truly innovative, disruptive thing that you want to implement into a heavily regulated industry, you should have always this on top of your mind when talking to the people, and be very honest about it, and tell them exactly how far you have come, or how far this company have come that you want to bring into the organization and such, because otherwise you are going to meet very heavy resistance in doing this, because nobody wants to work with magic and all of a sudden end up as fraudulent, I would
Yeah,
say.
like with the Theranos, or
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly why. And I mean, without mentioning any specifics, but I have been working with Paolo Macchiarini, which was the surgeon with the plastic air pipes, for example, which were, when he entered the organization where I was at that point, you know, he was this kind of magician, but he had the charisma, he had all of the talks around it. So everybody bought into it, more or less. And then we have the outcome, and we have this magician who was, you know, he wasn't really, you know, doing the right things in the right place in the right ways. So this has also created a sense of, you know, magic within healthcare does not belong at all. So
It's
that's,
kind of like a backlash.
it is.
Yeah.
But it's a good
It's
way in understanding how the mentality is within heavily regulated industries as well.
Yeah, it's for sure is tricky territory to navigate, and of course I think regulations are mostly good, of course, to have, even though they cannot always can still have accidents happen, of course. But also it's sort of like they are regulations also, of course, hinders innovation, or at least the pace of innovation. And I think also, and this is different in different countries, of course, but overall there is there's something I think in some areas, like for instance maybe bleeding edge medical technology, but also let's say the area of AI or other new technology. They are always sort of like working in the fringes of the law, not that they are criminal, but rather that the law has not been designed for those particular new edge cases that occurs. And or maybe the laws need to be rewritten to allow
Exactly.
for a certain thing that is, you know, beneficial, but also maybe comes with some potential dangers. And that kind of like back and forth between innovation and lawmaking is kind of fascinating. And it's very hard to say, oh, you know, get rid of those laws and let people do what they want to do. Of course, that will not work. And sometimes laws are being remade surprisingly fast, but there is an inbuilt resistance or a change, resistance to change within laws, just so that you don't, you know, change them every second week, of course.
Yeah,
So
and I
it's
think that
kind of
one
like
of the industries that we're gonna see have this very high impact is, you know, fintech industry, you know, talking about, you know, cryptocurrency, for example, blockchain technology. And especially when you take a look at the blockchain technology and how you actually can use this, you know, by storing medical records, enabling you as the owner of your own private health information, and also looking into the economical sides of it when you're trying to. And this is also connecting actually back to the threats that we were talking about earlier on, and how a government or a state can try to shoot down all of the initiatives that are coming because they are threatful. I mean, if we're going to do a Swedish e-crown, like a cryptocurrency in Sweden, and you have this Bitcoin industry on the side, you know, of course that it's a given that the Swedish government wants to have their own cryptocurrency, trying to manipulate out the Bitcoin industry because they want to have a bit of the cake as well. And this is something that we can see in all of these industries. And also, as you said, innovation is going to visualize the need of a faster handling and management of the laws and the law setting authorities within the state or the government, because we need to move from a very rigid circumstances where we kind of are right now. But we also see that, for example, this pandemic and the COVID-19 situation has enable the authorities to be able to very rapidly change the laws so that they can be suiting the circumstances where we are at this moment. And I think that this is going to be very common in the future, but we will also see that we were going to have regulations in how often or in how deep we can go into making the new regulations and laws. But I think that together we, as a society, we're going to push the needs for being more, sorry for using this, but more agile in the ways that we're thinking about the laws in governments.
I like that. The agile society.
Let's not talk about that.
No, but I think that's good. And I think maybe that's also a good end to this very fascinating conversation. And thanks again, Noelia, for coming here and talking with me and telling me and the audience about the hardships. And just a final question, since you mentioned that a lot of people reached out to you, maybe told you about their own experiences. You don't have any thoughts on writing a book with the title, sort of like The Dark Side of Innovation Management? Or, I mean that as a serious question.
I have never thought about it. That's never crossed my mind. But I would love to do a follow-up article with the Sifted magazine to talk about the effects that the initial article had. But that maybe is something that I need to think about to share my experience at least when it comes to innovation and the dark sides.
I will share your the link to your LinkedIn post that sort of like got this whole thing started below the video in the YouTube channel. And again, Noelia, thank you very much. Super happy to get to meet you like this and talk about these issues.
Of course.
Take care and have a good day. All right.
The
Bye.
same to you. A lot
See
of
you.
pleasure. Bye.
Bye.